Greetings and welcome to episode 15 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm Andrew Wadle, and joined with my co-host Brock Vitek, along with our special guest today, Lynn Boadwine of Boadwine Farms from Baltic, South Dakota. We'll get into introducing Lynn here in a bit, but kind of a milestone here in that we are broadcasting to you today from the American Biogas Council's Business of Biogas meeting. And tomorrow we will be hosting a panel discussion titled Symbiotic Solutions, Harmonizing Biogas Systems and Farm Operations. Pretty fancy topic for manure guys. And really what we're looking to do is how to promote anaerobic digestion, and how do we get more producers, dairy, beef, and swine, into anaerobic digestion. And one of our esteemed panelists is with us today, and that is Lynn Boadwine.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for having me, Brock. It's a pleasure to be here in beautiful St. Louis looking at the arch, and we're at the biogas, trying to shed a little light on how you connect a farm to a biogas plant.
Very good. Lynn, as you introduce yourself, could you give us some background and tell us about your farm operations at Boadwine Farms?
So I come from a line. I'm fourth generation. My family farm, we Norwegian immigrants, came in a covered wagon and homesteaded in 1874 in South Dakota. And we're on the same farm. I started out of college. I was going to be a hog producer. Somehow I ended up, we had a small dairy on the farm, milked 40 cows, and came out of that. It was, when I got out of school in the 80s, it was high interest rates, and Dad said, we need to keep milking cows. And so it's evolved, and now in the systems I manage, I have some partnership dairies. We have 13,000 cows in the young stock and farm.
And tell us about of those dairies, where are they located? And
so they're in the southeastern part of the state, in and around Sioux Falls. So I've got dairies. I mean, I know South Dakota is not very populated, but I have dairies in the most populated areas in Sioux Falls, in that area. So I have some in the most populated county. I've got 4 operations there in Minnehaha County. I've got another one in Lake County, and then up north, I've got another operation. So kind of spread out. I mean, the farthest away is 120 miles from my home. So.
Excellent. So, Lynn, you've always been pretty innovative in everything that you do. And so what got you involved in anaerobic digestion?
Well, I have been innovative, but I've got a lot of junk in my tree grove of innovations that didn't work. So I was never that excited about methane digesters. I had heard in different, boards I'm on, and people, I knew the early methane digesters, a lot of them were sitting empty. It didn't work out. And I was like, this isn't going to work. I'm not interested. I don't need the distraction. So then, I was approached by a company, and I said, I don't know about this. It's waste my time. I need to focus on what I do, milking cows. I don't want to get distracted. I'm the guy that, tried to build an on-farm ethanol plant that didn't work. So it's like, focus. But after digging a little more into the sustainability story, I could see, and I'd really never understood, the LCFS credits and the value creation there. And so all of a sudden my mind changed. And along with that, I had been having some odor issues. I said I live in the part of the state that's more populated. So I just had a small dairy kind of an uprising of a couple guys with $1 million houses that came after the dairy, but that didn't matter to them. And I was looking at the methane digester as, kind of my social license to survive, an odor solution. So that's what really got me going down this.
So the odor solution then, I guess the exclamation point was the LCFS, because in addition to the social license, there was then presumably with LCFS a payday where.
Yeah. And, how I looked at it is I partnered with a company that was going to take care of the capital costs. And a lot of producers ask me about this. Well, or other outside people, like in South Dakota. Like South Dakotans have this thing that the big rest of the world is coming and taking advantage of them. And I had one public official tell me, well, you should have ownership in this, Lynn. You should, we don't like these big groups taking advantage of us. Well, I got a different viewpoint. I'm sharing in some cash flow. My invested capital in monetary is really zero in the project I'm in, other than some time and effort, which we'll talk about. But my invested capital is zero. So any return I have on that is pretty good. So, I was interested in that. And I'll just say another thing. In the meantime, I'll give a plug to a guy who doesn't know me, but I've heard him a few times, Frank Mitloner. And I don't know if anybody, he's his podcasts are very good. And hearing him a couple times really opened my mind and said, you know what, you need to change your mind and maybe get into this. And here's an opportunity.
Yeah, Frank is a very well-known thought leader coming from agriculture and speaking on the truth, the facts behind emissions and how the carbon cycle works with livestock production. I've heard him speak a couple times as well and completely agree with you. Lynn, as you've pursued anaerobic digestion on your farm operations, what challenges have you encountered along the way?
Well, I think, when we signed, the first thing is, the agreements. Us farmers, we're used to doing land leases and sitting in an auction buying cattle or whatever. But, I think the first agreement I had looked at with a biogas was 86 pages. I don't know how you guys are about reading attorney stuff, but, puts me to sleep pretty quick. And so driving through that, I think there was just a lot of common sense things. And any party you're entering in an agreement, I had to learn the business end of it is like, obviously if their attorneys write it, you're going to write it more favorable to your party, and so every farmer's got to understand that, and you've got to really think through your operation. Like I said, that contract, our farm had been there, 4 generations, 1874, and often the companies we're dealing with are in their infancy, a few years old. So I'm hoping that I don't lose that operation and it's in our family for another 100 years. And so you've got to really look at those agreements, and when they're putting something on your operation, just reading every paragraph and thinking about it. That's the painful. It took us several months of working through this contract.
On the flip side of that, Lynn, what would you say is important for the developers to think about or to realize that they're working with a multi-generational operation? And they've maybe only been around a few years.
So I think the first unique thing with the developers, and it was a good thing, like the company I was working with, a couple of great people, high ideals, passionate about their work in the sustainability area, probably coming from a more liberal thought process. And I think just the hours that we put into it, learning about each other, them understanding what a farm is, understanding, like I joked, I'm going to show you the reason why these aren't the flyover states, and so that's the first thing, getting an understanding of where everybody comes from. And then how is this all going to fit into this operation? Sometimes some of the developers, the salespeople might pitch something, and it may be a little unknown to them, pitch something that's not exactly in the contracts. You know what I mean? You have to make sure what is being discussed with you is actually what's in the print or makes it into the print.
That's very good advice. Lynn, aside from the contractual challenges and just getting to know each other, working with the developer, are there any other challenges that you've encountered along the way?
Well, I think probably devil in the detail, like one of them, in the contract it says, well, you'll contribute water. Well, does that mean you'll just hook up to our water lines, or will you hook up to our water lines and we meter you water and you pay for it? Okay. It's just all these little things. And the more details you work through, the less ambiguous later that you have to, well, who's doing this? And then every time you have something that hasn't been outlined, it's got potential to cause conflict. And, sometimes you get mad during construction. Well, it's like the day that they did a one call, but that didn't mean that the electrical lines on my farm, yeah, great, you did a one call, but it doesn't do the internal electrical. And they dug through, and 3 barns that have power ventilation were off. And they were working overtime. It was Saturday. So, Lynn wasn't very happy.
Yeah, and just for all of our people in town who listen, if we have power ventilated barns and we lose electricity, we've got a real crisis on our hands, because providing those cows with breathable air and exhausting gas is critical to keeping them alive. So cutting off power to barns is really bad.
No, and there was a lesson for me in that. It was a day that was, because it was internal, so my generators had no effect on this. And it was about 55 degrees out. And, we get doors and we start, but it's those things. You got to think about everything, when you have somebody come on your farm.
So in addition to that, when it comes to working with even training the developers, what did you have to do from the training standpoint in getting them to understand what comes out of the cow, lands on the concrete, is not going to be what goes into that digester, and that there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and that's the symbiotic solution of harmonizing biogas systems and farm operations piece.
so, so I think I was attractive to the developer because, well, we had, a lot of dairies have sand bedding for cow comfort. Sand is great. Golden standard. Sand is terrible because it likes to settle out and plug and wreck everything. And so, all of us recognize, sand is scary because, this digester that you have a 20-some day retention time in is a perfect vessel to settle sand out. And we all recognize that, and they wanted to see my my mechanical separation systems. And I don't want to poke fun, but I don't know how many of them, at least not initially. I mean, it took about 3-4 visits, like, to understand the flow and what all is happening, and solid separate, how that all works. And I'm sure there's some that I had through there that never really understood, just faked it. And so, on the farm, you have to communicate, like they want manure samples, but your system. You want them to have good numbers. So you really got to be open and like, hey, you need to do this now, maybe trust us to take some of these samples for you or whatever that are, initially. That was something where we had a little rocky road, I guess.
Lynn, that reminds me of something that was discussed in the Biogas Developer Bootcamp panel discussion here at the conference yesterday, and that is anaerobic digestion is one piece of a large process that takes place in a livestock operation, with the dairy farm being no exception. It is not, here's the dairy farm in one box and draw a nice little arrow to the digester over here in another box. It's a whole diagram, and the digester is one piece of it.
Exactly. And I think, the understanding, so I love this circular view of a dairy farm. I always say, I told the digester people, you're the second digester. My milk cow, she is the first digester. She has got this aerobic stomach, the rumen, full of microbes. Us guys eat salad to lose weight. Cattle eat greens to make milk and gain weight. That's the difference between our stomachs. So that digester, I'd always joke, they were worried that they, needed enough nutrient. And I said, it's my nutritionist's job to give you as little digestible product as you can. That's what we're working off of here. And so, kind of the thought process, and I'm going to be as efficient as possible. It's great you're here. It's great you've invested this kind of money. I love odor, but compared to what's at stake here in our operation, our primary reason for being is to make milk and make it financially successful, or we don't have a very sustainable farm. And, so I just had to have them understand, I know you're investing a lot here. I know it's huge to you guys, the amount of invested capital, but my reason for being, the reason we've been here since 1874, our primary is making milk efficiently. You can't get in the way of that.
That is a huge thing that the developers need to understand. And we talked about it yesterday in the boot camp, that you guys are dairy producers first. You operate a biorefinery second, and perhaps even a distant second in terms of importance.
So Andrew, when you put it into perspective, a lot of these contracts, I don't know where they're all, we're working off of gross income on a cow of $6,000 something dollars. And we can make a mistake with any of that. A cow gets mastitis, a cow affects her, she might lose 25% of her production. If we have to change things on the farm for them, we can't afford, we're in a pennies business of margin. We can't afford to have a digester or something change. They wanted me to change my bedding source. I said, that's non-negotiable. I could lose 3 to 5 pounds of milk. Your operation and what income it flows to me is meaningless in that scenario.
Yeah. Well, that's really huge. And so we just kind of covered the piece about the integrating the dairy with the digester. Can you talk a little bit about under the category of challenges? And I think it's good to talk about challenges because we're not throwing rocks. It's just a matter of, first of all, this industry is in its infancy, and so there's things to be learned. The things you did in your first one, you didn't do in your second one. The things you did in your second one, you didn't do on your third one. So the things we learn are really good. So, kind of following that same vein, what did you experience in construction? Okay, so the deal is done. They're agreeing to let you use sand. So now we're building a project. So what did you start to see there?
Well, and the one thing you've got to think back, we were starting up during COVID. So, that ended, so I'm not trying to throw any of these companies under the bus, but these people are starting new organizations, new put-togethers of people, and they've got to pull it together, and then you're in COVID. It's not as easy to travel. It's not normal course of business. And so when we started out, people couldn't get out there. We were doing test borings and all these things. And, I remember the day they went to do test borings and they ran into an old junk pile on the farm. We just happened. I said I was never going to build. I told a guy 15 years ago where we had all this concrete that we took out, and he said, well, let's bury that somewhere where we'll never build anything. Well, guess what? Dead center right in the middle of a digester, and so just little things. Well, you never, who's going to pay for moving that? It's little things like this. It's just, I think sometimes I'd get grumpy, but you've got to be in the right mental state to okay, let's work through this. So, yeah. And the other thing, nothing ever goes as fast as you expect. I've seen that with all of the projects. It's just timetables. And I'm not. Farmers aren't that organized always. And I just kind of chuckle at all of these meetings with all this fancy software on scheduling, and I shouldn't make fun of it, but it's like, wow, every week a scheduling meeting where you spend more time talking about scheduling and less time about working. Yeah,
that's a pretty tough sell for a guy who bases his schedule on the weather in large part, right?
No. Meetings about meetings, right?
Yep. No.
So Lynn, we've talked about how you got into your project, the construction process. Now, could you tell us about the startup and commissioning of the system at your farm?
So we've had on 3 sites that were connected, and they were the early ones that started. And I think commissioning for the company, speaking for them, it was pretty seamless. We just, one day we turned a different pump on in our separator room, and manure went to them. And we didn't have a lot of, I remember them doing a little bit of seeding of the digesters, but, I think things just went awfully smooth. I have not had a lot of trouble. I think in the contract it was where, what happens if you shut this off, we're going to turn this valve. We just haven't had big things. I had to think for them because they don't know my systems. So all I had to do is, okay, look, if for some reason the pump to the digester doesn't go, I've got another pump that starts and just pumps to my lagoons. And that's, pretty simple. I don't have to be connected to all of their systems. So commissioning for me went pretty well. I can't speak. I didn't have to do, but I think they were making gas. I think they were pleased.
So knowing your operations as I do, and in full disclosure, I've worked with you, Lynn. I'm not sure if you're keeping track. You're trying to forget for more than 25 years, and so I've been seeing the trials and travails that you've been through. But I would say that as someone looking at your operation, part of the reason why your startup was seamless was because, and I mentioned this concept in the boot camp yesterday, and that is you were expert at sand separation before becoming expert at operating a digester. And so what we see sometimes is that everything starts the same day. The sand separator starts getting manure, and as soon as manure starts coming out of the sand separator, good, bad, or indifferent, it's going into the digester. Whereas in some of your cases, at Boadwine Farms, for instance, you were separating sand for years there, and maybe you had different systems at the other farms, but you knew how to operate a system.
So I think something that I failed to add is in the design, the company was great that I worked with. They valued my input, and, we even had it contractually that I had to agree because, these contracts are for a term of years. So you always have to look at everything as like, you know what? After 20 years is over or whatever, this is going to be on our farm. And the investment, you don't want, so I want it right. And, so with sand separation, in respect to that, there was a lot of things that we changed. It's the first time I'd done it, but I knew how a pipe and how its flow line and how important it was if you had sand. If you ever had a blip, because I know that we can have blips in our separation system, whether it's a piece of equipment that doesn't work or and it wasn't a big deal, but it's a big deal if it plugs everything up to the digester. So I probably kept them out of trouble that way.
Lynn, as we continue to step through the process of a biogas project with you, we've just talked about startup and commissioning. Now, how long until gas is produced that's ready for sale? And then also, what does ongoing operation of the digester look like, and just maintaining an ongoing business relationship with the developer partner?
So, I think some of the slowdown was getting all the gas lines in. And I think that's something that, probably in this process that I haven't spoke to, that is a learning. And I think it's a new learning. I don't know if you follow, we've got a big deal like in South Dakota now, this war about carbon pipelines. And, it kind of shocked me how many people are just absolutely against anything, and we had that with gas lines. So I think one of the slowdowns was them getting all the easements for the gas lines.
And you're talking about the gas lines from your dairies to the main
injection point. And I give a lot of credit to the company that I dealt with because they it was a rocky road getting easements. It's their first discovery out. They look at, it wasn't the developer we went with, but I had one that was from the West Coast where it was crowded. And he said to me, "Oh man, this is going to be so simple out here. It's just wide open spaces. You just put pipes. This is nothing." And I think to some of that, when everybody came out from a very populous area, they're thinking, "Oh, this is easy." But then you've got to get the legal right, the easement, if you're not a public utility. So all these things are things that, wow, you got to think about, because we got to go through miles of farmers. And sometimes I know they had issues just because of the political view of somebody, that, hey, and that's what you have to work through. So that slowed, I think, them getting a start on gas. So, but I think all in all, it didn't take, I knew they flared for a while, but operations got going. And I think it's, just from hearing from them, it's kind of tricky business, this RNG thing, and getting that gas pipeline quality is, complicated stuff. So I give them a lot of credit. So
how long would you say from pick it, whether it's from the time you got manure or started receiving manure to the time you started making gas?
Well, I think it was a couple months, probably.
Yeah. And when you were going through the easements, or the company was going through the easements, putting the gas lines in, so how receptive were people to that? So what were some of the things I had to work through there? And I'm mentioning that because there's producers listening to this, and let them know what they could be facing. So
I think, this just a mistake that I observed is, they came in with an easement company, somebody to go do this that wasn't local. I think it was, they needed to get something done fast. So I think it was just people they brought in that were probably had been working on the Keystone XL pipeline, if I'm not correct. So people not from this area. So I kind of said to him, "Hey, you should have used the guy that Rural Water uses, who, when they were putting the Lewis and Clark pipeline, came and got easements. I mean, he knows my dog Kenny's name, and sits in and has a cup of coffee. And, I think that's a learning. The guy from Louisiana doesn't have a lot of commonality with the South Dakotan. And, so hey, a learning.
Yeah, funny. So, when you wrap it all up, give us a couple things as far as what would you want a developer to know in terms of putting together a dairy project? Now, in other words, if you guys do this, you're going to set yourselves up for success.
Well, I think first, what I talked about is, get the contract right. And think about the contract, and I still don't do this good in other business things, but, in your contract, you shouldn't always think of success. Your contract should hold those things for you in failure. We haven't had failure, but I think that's something you got to think about. And then, spell a lot of stuff out, and then be of the mindset that you're, and have those meetings that you're going to get along with the people you're working with. You just kind of got to, there were some days, they could all attest, Lynn, he can get mad, but Yeah, I can, but I usually never leave it too bad. So, and I do. I mean, good, the digester. And one of the issues is these people from all over the country. So, like I've still got a lot of the same employees I had 25 years ago. I'm not used to a lot of job jumpers, and I think it's just inherent with that business. And so, one day it's this guy, and now we got a next. And I feel that now, this company, they're getting good structure, good people, getting things figured out. I think it was a gold rush in the beginning, and it's settling down, figuring out your problem. So I feel better now. So I think that's the thing, is asking a company what you're going to is who's doing it and digging in deep to make sure. And then another thing, putting some dates and landmarks in there, because I've heard of some of these projects that are tied up and aren't funded. Some of those things are very important.
You need an off-ramp. The developer needs an off-ramp.
You do.
And the dairyman needs an off-ramp. Yep. And that speaking of the dairyman, so that was something for the developers to know. Are your recommendations to dairymen any different? What would you say to a dairyman about to go down this same road?
No, I think I would do it again. Some guys have asked me, the questions about the manure stream, and and those are the right questions. Is this going to affect how my operation how it was working? I had a unique experience. Somebody in the executive management team of this digester company said, we'd like to, our future, we'd like to take components of your manure. And I said, what?
You mean like nutrients?
Yes, nutrients, waste. He was thinking, they were a waste solutions type company. He was thinking, and I said, no, you're not. No, that manure gets me feed, corn silage from my neighbors. They want my manure. And we had to go through that whole understanding that it's not waste.
Yeah.
And so, that's just, that was learning.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That would certainly be the sign of someone who would require some training and understanding of the fact that what animal agriculture is all about. And Brock's heard me say a million times, I think it's the greatest recycling system on the planet. When we're taking the manure, taking the nutrients to grow the feed, to make the milk, to produce the manure, to right on around and around and around. So
it certainly is. Lynn, as we look to wrap up our time together here today, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I'm gathering, I don't know if you guys would agree, is that from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, so much of it is about people. Well, and I think it's so important for the biogas project, for example, for both the producer and the developer to take the time to get to know one another, understand each other's business, and at least know and try to understand each other's goals. And only then can you possibly start working together. I think that's important. We have to focus on people.
Yeah, and I think the people thing, and there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know if it's being met. I'm not, but something I hear from everywhere is that we just don't have a lot of people out there in biogas with the understanding, and I'm kind of surprised that we're not getting more out of universities. I mean, hey, we're at this big biogas conference, and I mean, who's teaching our young people about this whole renewable energy, engineering and all that? I don't know. Maybe it's going on, but just me seeing and hearing from those that are hiring in this space, there's a shortage of these people with the knowledge.
Very, very well stated. And I can assure you that Andrew and I, along with all of our colleagues at Secchi Agri-Services and Engineering, go to work every day with that in mind, trying to meet that need. And with that, just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be our guest here on Sustaining the Herd today, as well as for joining us for our panel discussion here at the conference tomorrow. And for all of our listeners, thank you for joining the herd once again today for our conversation with Lynn, and we look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks with a new episode.